Hey guys, tonight we're crawling back in time to a place where breakfast isn't served with smiles or smoothies. It's handed to you in a chipped bowl by someone who may or may not be plotting your death. You're waking up in the cold, scratchy shadows of medieval stone walls, wrapped in a blanket that smells like wet dog and regret. You open your eyes to the sound of a bell, low, hollow, like a distant drumroll that doesn't care if you've had enough sleep. Spoiler alert, you haven't. Your back aches from a straw mat. Not even a proper bed, just straw flat as a guilty conscience. You sit up, bones cracking like old door hinges. Your breath mists in the air. Winter has crept in overnight, and the stone beneath you is less floor and more unrelenting slab of punishment. This is your life now. You're a medieval assassin in training. But unlike the action-packed fantasies, your morning doesn't start with a dagger flip or a rooftop chase. It starts with one undeniable fact: you're hungry. And not the modern kind of hungry where your stomach makes a polite grumble between Uber Eats scrolls. No, this is the kind of hungry where your ribs are a little too visible, and your last meal was so bland it might have been ghost food. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge barefoot down the corridor, stepping over the sleeping form of another apprentice. He probably snuck in late from guard duty or a mission. No one questions it. You're all half-wolves anyway. Light sleepers, twitchy, and starving. The training compound is part monastery, part barracks, part poorly funded soup kitchen. You weren't recruited for your cooking skills, but your survival might just depend on what's served in that grimy little corner of the refectory. You follow the scent, burnt barley, wet with smoke, and someone's unwashed tunic. You reach the common room. A few others are already slouched on benches, wooden spoons in hand, heads drooping forward like they're dozing off into their porridge. A thin monk ladles out something that resembles boiled beige sadness into your wooden bowl. You look down. Yep, barley again. Just barley. No fruit, no honey, not even a pity sprinkle of herbs. It's so basic it makes you nostalgic for air. Still, you eat. Because assassins don't skip meals, even the bad ones. Food is fuel, and today might require you to climb a wall, outrun a guard, or hold your breath in a moat for slightly longer than is medically advisable. Historians still argue whether assassin diets were part of physical conditioning or simply the result of monastic-style poverty. But either way, skipping breakfast could mean collapsing halfway through a rooftop sprint. And that's just embarrassing. You sit with your back to the wall. Never in the middle of the room. That's for fools. You shovel warm barley into your mouth while keeping one eye on the door and the other on your bowl. No one talks. Talking is for after breakfast or never. A newcomer enters, and for a flicker of a moment, the energy shifts. He's older, scarred, and moves like a man who could kill you with the bowl you're holding. He nods once. You nod back. That's how respect works here. Silently, and with your mouth full. You remember when you first arrived, fresh-faced, eager, and way too loud. You ask questions, too many. Someone tripped you on your way to the fire pit, and your bowl of broth went flying. That was your dinner. You didn't eat again until noon the next day, and the message was clear. Silence isn't just golden, it's edible. You've learned to read body language like scripture. A twitch, a lean, a sideways glance. Here they all mean something. Now the barley's gone, and you're licking the spoon. You're not proud, but pride doesn't keep you warm. You tilt your bowl slightly to catch every last drop. Your fingers brush against the wood, worn smooth by 100 hungry hands before yours. Some of those hands are buried now. Some disappeared. A few turned up in rivers. No one asks. You shuffle your way to the wash station, where a jug of icy water waits for the cleanup ritual. It's less hygiene and more obedience training. You rinse your bowl and hands, then place everything back where it belongs. That's another rule. Everything in its place. Even you. By now, your stomach has stopped complaining, but not because it's satisfied. It's just given up. You can feel the mush settling like a warm stone inside you. Enough to keep you upright. Not enough to keep you happy. Outside, the morning sun rises over the misty yard. Training will begin soon. But first, the walk. Always the walk. Around the compound, barefoot in silence. A daily exercise in humility, pain tolerance, and frostbite prevention. You wrap your thin wool tunic tighter and begin the slow circuit. The cold bites at your toes, but you push through. You pass the chapel, its door slightly ajar, candles flickering inside. Sometimes, when no one's watching, you slip in and sit for a moment. Not to pray exactly, just to feel something warm. But today, a senior is inside already, murmuring something in Latin. You move on. Near the south wall, you hear a whisper of movement and glance up, just in time to see another trainee scrambling across the ledge, blindfolded. Part of the acrobatics test. He slips, catches himself, dangles for a second too long. Your breath catches with him, but he pulls up and disappears over the edge. You nod, impressed. That's breakfast strength. As you complete your circuit, you return to the training yard. The instructor is already waiting. Long beard, steel gaze, and a stick that's more bark than tree. He doesn't speak, just points. You line up with the others. Time to train. Your breakfast now churns in your stomach as you're instructed to sprint, then roll, then climb, then dodge. You taste barley in your throat, mixed with regret and effort. But you do it. You all do. Because the unspoken rule here is simple. You don't want to find out what happens if you quit halfway. There's a pause in the training, a moment to catch your breath. One of the others leans over and mutters, "Bet tomorrow's breakfast is turnips." You both chuckle softly. In this world, that qualifies as a joke. The sun climbs higher. Your muscles ache. But your mind is sharper now, humming with silent calculations, routes, escape paths, who looks strong and who looks tired. You've made it through another morning, and you're still hungry. Later in the day, you're given a moment of rest, if you can call sitting on a damp stone ledge rest. Your legs throb from the morning drills. You shift your weight carefully, favoring the side that didn't collide with a wooden post an hour ago. Across the yard, someone is practicing silent takedowns on a scarecrow. Poor straw man's lost his head twice already. You watch him slump again and wonder idly if scarecrows have better breakfasts in this life than you. Still, your thoughts drift back to food, not out of luxury but necessity. It's almost midday, and you're allowed another small meal before more training. Small being the operative word here. Your hopes aren't high. You've learned better. By the time the bell clangs for noon, you're already on your feet. The walk back to the refectory is slow and single file, more out of exhausted obedience than reverence. No one talks. You can hear the scrape of sandals and boots across the courtyard, the flapping of tattered cloaks, the occasional cough. Someone sneezes and mutters a prayer under their breath. Just in case, that's how plagues start. The kitchen door yawns open with the squeal of unoiled hinges. Inside, the monk from earlier, Brother Alric, is stirring something in a cauldron. The scent hits you like a half-hearted apology. It's root vegetable stew, which sounds promising until you realize vegetable just means whatever was almost too soft to save. And stew means boiled until beige. You hold out your bowl, and Brother Alric squints at you like he's debating whether you deserve more than 2 ladles. Apparently, today you do. He serves you a modest scoop, then gestures you along. You mutter a thank you, even though etiquette here is optional and sarcasm is your only surviving defense mechanism. You sit on the same bench as earlier, next to someone with a scar curling under one eye like a worm frozen mid-wriggle. You've never learned his name. He doesn't seem like the type who wants it remembered. You eat, because again you must. This time the texture is adventurous. Some chunks are still firm, others disintegrate like wet parchment. You find a piece of turnip and almost celebrate. Turnips have flavor. They're the rock stars of root stew. There's a rumor someone once found a sliver of salt pork in theirs and passed out from excitement. That may be exaggerated, but you wouldn't blame them. Historians still argue whether assassins ate differently from other monastic orders, whether their diets were strategic for stealth and stamina, or just the usual poverty fare. Some evidence suggests certain brotherhoods were encouraged to remain lean, even slightly underfed, because a lighter body made scaling walls easier. Others claim this was just a convenient side effect of having no budget for food beyond the basics. Either way, there's no cheese, no meat, and definitely no ale. You'd kill for a crust of rye bread with butter. And ironically, killing might be the only way you'd get it. You scoop the last bit of stew, which has started to cool into a glue-like paste. You scrape the sides of your bowl with mechanical precision, the kind of desperation that's more reflex than hunger now. There's always the hope you'll stumble on something new, a rogue bean, a slice of garlic, an unclaimed mystery root. Across from you, someone burps softly, then pretends they didn't. You glance up. It's Mara, the only female trainee who's lasted more than a month. She's fierce in a way that's less fire, more slow poison. Deadly, quiet, unshakably calm. You nod. She nods. That's breakfast conversation here. Or lunch, in this case. After the meal, you follow the usual cleaning ritual. This time, the water is even colder. Your hands sting. You dry them on your tunic, which is already damp from earlier sweat. But you've got another hour of rest, or what passes for it, before combat drills resume. Some use this time to nap in corners. Others sharpen blades, or rewrap bandages. You head to the herb garden. The garden is hidden behind a crumbling wall near the eastern edge of the compound. No one really guards it. After all, it's not like mint leaves are a security risk. But you've noticed something. Certain herbs, when chewed before training, seem to sharpen your focus. Or maybe it's just the placebo of feeling like you've done something secret and clever. You reach for a sprig of something greenish with narrow leaves and a slightly peppery smell. You think it's yarrow, or mugwort. You're not entirely sure. Herbalism is taught to the advanced apprentices, and you're not there yet. But you've seen the older ones crush leaves into salves, drop petals into tea, whisper names like feverfew, and woundwort like spells. One of them even mentioned assassin's breakfast tea, an old blend of herbs used to increase alertness and suppress hunger. Sounds useful. Maybe myth, but it sticks in your mind. There's a fringe theory that some medieval assassins, especially those from certain Middle Eastern sects, used psychoactive herbs as part of their rituals, a mix of stimulants and hallucinogens to reach heightened states of readiness. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or specific to isolated cults. But in your compound, the only thing close to a drug is mint, and the only ritual is not dying before lunch. You chew the leaf anyway, grimacing at the bitterness. It curls your tongue, like biting down on soap laced with pepper. Still, you swallow. Maybe it helps. Maybe it just distracts you from the stew. You return to the yard as a bell tolls again, this time sharper, more urgent. Afternoon drills. Close combat. No weapons, just hands, feet, elbows, and instinct. The instructor barks once. Everyone lines up. The air is cooler now, shadows lengthening. You square your stance and wait. Mara steps forward to face you. Of course she does. The first strike comes fast. Her palm grazes your shoulder, redirecting you off balance. You recover quickly, sweep low, but she's already spun out of reach. Your pulse quickens. You're aware of every twitch, every blink. She lunges again, and this time you catch her wrist. A brief tangle, then she's free. You're both breathing hard, but no one speaks. The others watch, waiting for weakness. And that's the thing about hunger. It doesn't just gnaw at your stomach. It sharpens your nerves, makes you leaner, faster, more efficient. There's no extra weight, no softness, only edges. Eventually, the session ends with a grunt from the instructor. He claps his hands once, and you all break. You're bleeding from one knuckle. You hadn't noticed until now. Back at the basin, you rinse the cut. The water runs pink for a moment, then clear. You press a torn piece of linen to it and wrap your hand tightly. Someone behind you whispers, "Dinner better be warm." You don't answer, but your stomach growls in agreement. You head toward the evening meal in a haze of bruised limbs and half-focused thoughts. The compound is quieter now. The drills are over. The shouts have faded. Even the birds, those nosy, feathered spies nesting in the tower's cracks, seem to have called it a day. The refectory again. Same cracked beams overhead. Same flickering torchlight dancing along the stone walls like bored ghosts. You know every creak of the benches by now, every knot in the grain of the tables. This place doesn't change. You do. You grow leaner, more alert, less hopeful about what's in the pot. Tonight's offering smells different. Not exactly better, just different. Less like boiled wood, more like boiled hay. That's probably not the progress you'd hoped for. You take your spot in line. The kitchen monk, Brother Alric, ladles out the mystery mush with the same indifferent rhythm as before. But wait, is that a hint of spice? You squint at the contents of your bowl. There's a reddish tint, a faint scent of something sharper than the usual blandness. Pepper, maybe? Or dried mustard seed. Someone behind you mutters, "Celebration stew." You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. First frost. They always throw in something extra before the snow locks us in. You sit down, grateful for anything that breaks the monotony. The mush is, well, still mush. But it has a tiny kick to it, just enough to make your tongue twitch in surprise. Someone further down the table even starts humming. Not a song, really, just a low, rhythmic sound. It feels out of place in the refectory, almost rebellious. As you eat, You remember a whispered story from your first week here. That long ago, an assassin order disguised as a monastic brotherhood used spices not just for flavor, but as part of a secret code. More pepper meant danger. More salt meant a mission was coming. Cinnamon meant a death had occurred. Historians still argue whether this is true, or just the desperate imagination of people trying to make their food seem more interesting. You're inclined to believe the latter, but tonight, the spice makes you wonder. After dinner, you're assigned to compost duty. It's as glamorous as it sounds. You haul 2 sloshing buckets of kitchen waste to the pit behind the stables. It steams in the chill air, a thick, swampy mountain of peelings, rinds, and yesterday's regrets. You dump your bucket and turn to go, but something glints in the muck. You pause. It's a shard of metal. Thin. Curved. You nudge it with your boot. A broken spoon? A bent knife tip? You're not sure. You crouch, pick it up with 2 fingers, and wipe it clean. Definitely a blade fragment. Probably not supposed to be here. You pocket it without thinking. Not for any sneaky reason, just curiosity. In a place like this, you learn to keep interesting things close. As you walk back, your breath comes in little clouds. The first frost, they said. You believe it. The air has the sharpness of a blade left out in the cold too long. You hug your cloak tighter, though it does little against the chill. Back inside, the halls are dim. Most trainees have already gone to their bunks or the prayer chamber. You take a longer route to yours, past the storeroom. You slow your steps and listen. Inside, someone's whispering. You know better than to investigate openly. Instead, you crouch beside the wall and press your ear to the cold stone. The words are muffled, but you catch a few. Shipment, herbs, 2 days. Then a laugh, soft, dangerous, like a knife scraping gently on wood. Who's in there? You don't recognize the voice. Might not even be a fellow apprentice. Sometimes strangers come to the compound, messengers, secret allies, people who don't exist on maps. You've seen them once or twice, cloaked, silent, like they're allergic to eye contact. You slip away, quiet as moss on stone. You make it back to your chamber without being seen. Your chamber isn't much. A cot, a wooden box for your things, a blanket that smells permanently of wet wool. But you've made it yours in small ways. A stone on the sill that you found near the herb garden. A strip of leather tied around the bedpost. The blade fragment goes in the box with the rest. You sit on the cot and exhale. Today's hunger has eased, but it's never gone. You feel it in your bones now, as if your skeleton itself is leaner, sharper. Your body has adapted to the monk assassin lifestyle. Minimal, focused, unrelenting. There's a quirk of medieval records that often gets overlooked. While kings and knights get all the feasting scenes, there's less written about the lower echelons, the spies, the mercenaries, the assassins. But every now and then, a traveler's journal or a misplaced scroll reveals something odd, that certain groups fasted deliberately for days before missions. Not just to clear the body, but to heighten senses. It's said that fasting brings you closer to the divine, or at least to a state where you no longer fear the blade, because hunger already gnawed away your fear. You lie back and pull the blanket up to your chin. It's scratchy, always has been, but warmth is warmth. Your mind drifts, to the glint in the compost pile, to the whisper behind the storeroom wall, to the pepper in the stew. Coincidences? Or warnings? You close your eyes. A few bunks over, someone is snoring gently. You think it's Anton, the boy who sharpened his practice sword so often they had to take it away. He'll never be sent on a real mission. Not because he lacks skill, but because he talks in his sleep. You heard him once whispering about frogs and butter. You never asked why. Sleep comes slowly. Not like a gentle wave, but like creeping ivy, wrapping itself around you inch by inch. You don't fight it. You've learned not to. Dreams here aren't comforting, but they pass the time. And in the haze before sleep, your thoughts are vivid. You imagine being sent beyond the walls. Disguised as a merchant, maybe, or a wandering friar. You imagine slipping past guards, leaving behind only a single broken window latch. You imagine being light on your feet because your belly is empty, because breakfast was roots and grit and courage. You imagine walking away from a palace as the sun rises, your blade clean, your conscience murky, your next meal already hours too far away. And for just a second, you smile. You wake before the bell, which is saying something, considering how brutally loud the bell is. One moment you're dreaming about juggling apples made of steel. The next, you're blinking into the gray pre-dawn, listening to nothing. No clang, no shouting, just silence thick enough to hear your own heartbeat. That's rarely a good sign. You dress quickly, wool tunic, belt, cloak. Same scratchy socks, same boots with the cracked sole. You strap your training dagger across your waist without thinking. Your body knows the routine now. Then you step into the hallway, half expecting to be alone. You're not. They're all up, every apprentice in your corridor. Some look confused, others just wary. The more senior ones have that blank, focused stare you've started to understand. The face you wear when something serious is happening, but you're too hungry to panic. Downstairs, you gather in the main hall, just like always. But instead of being shoved into drills or chores, you're ushered into the chapel. Yes, the chapel. That cold stone box with the eternal smell of beeswax and regret. You sit on the floor, cross-legged, as candles flicker around the space. The ceiling arches up into a point that never fails to remind you of a sword blade turned skyward. Brother Yarrick enters. Not the usual drill instructor. He's one of the silent brothers. The ones who usually spend their days in scriptoriums, copying ancient texts with haunted eyes. He holds a scroll and says only 2 words. Feast day. A murmur runs through the crowd. Not excitement, just confusion. Feast day? In October? That's odd. You know the religious calendar well enough. There's no feast today. Not officially. But that doesn't stop the cooks from bringing out trays. You're led back to the refectory, and this time, the smell is undeniable. Bread. Real bread. Not barley mush or oats boiled to surrender. Actual, crusty, flour-dusted bread. Your eyes water slightly. Not out of emotion. Just because your nose isn't used to airborne yeast. You get a bowl of lentil stew with visible vegetables. That's not a typo. Actual slices of onion. Carrot even. Maybe even garlic. You catch someone sobbing into their bowl. Or maybe they just burned their tongue. Hard to tell. Feast days in medieval assassin monasteries aren't just about food. They're tests in disguise. Hidden drills. You know this. Everyone does. You eat quickly but not too quickly, aware that someone is watching. You glance up and meet the eyes of a robed figure you've never seen before. Older, thinner, and not part of the compound's regular cast of characters. He nods once, almost imperceptibly. You look away. Historians still argue whether secret societies within larger monastic orders had separate calendars. Ones based not on saints, but on missions, deaths, and internal rites. Some claim that feast days were used as smokescreens for selecting new recruits or announcing silent promotions. Others say that's all myth, wishful thinking built on gaps in records. But today, you start to think they might be onto something. After the meal, you're herded outside. Not for drills, but for observation. No one ever explains what observation is. You're just told to sit in the courtyard, facing the inner gates, and wait. Sometimes for hours. Sometimes until it rains. Today, the sky is overcast but dry. The stones under you are cold, but you don't shift. Movement gets noticed. You scan the inner gate. Nothing happens. A crow lands on a parapet, watches you like it knows something. You resist the urge to glare back. That's how rumors start. He was disrespectful to birds. After nearly an hour, the gate opens. A single rider enters. The man is dressed in traveling clothes, dusty cloak, leather satchel, no visible weapon. But the silence he carries is heavy. Even the apprentices who've been here longer than you start to straighten up. The rider dismounts, speaks briefly with the gatekeeper, and disappears inside the chapel. That's it. Observation over. You're sent back to your duties. Chores, sparring, a lecture on medieval botany that somehow includes the phrase, leaves that make your lungs forget how to breathe. You try not to laugh, but the image of a cabbage leaf whispering, forget everything, is hard to shake. In the afternoon, you're summoned alone. You follow a younger brother through a side corridor you've never been allowed into before. The walls are older here, lined with tapestries so faded they might as well be fog. You count 7 doorways. You remember every step. He stops at a plain wooden door, knocks once, and leaves. Inside sits the man from the gate. He gestures for you to enter. You do. Carefully. Sit, he says. His voice is calm, dry, and unexpectedly soft. You sit. On the table between you, a roll of parchment, a block of cheese, and, this part makes you freeze, a small bowl of pomegranate seeds. Now that's unusual. Pomegranates were luxury imports in this part of the world during the medieval period, reserved for nobility or as medicinal offerings. They were symbols of knowledge, fertility, and sometimes death. In assassin circles, you've heard whispers. If they give you the seeds, they think you're ready. The man gestures to the bowl. Eat. You hesitate. Then take a single seed, bite down, and feel the tart burst across your tongue. It's like lightning, like memory, like blood. You watch today, he says. You notice the gate, the bread, the spice yesterday. You nod, unsure what's expected. He smiles. Good. That's the first lesson. We don't train you to fight. Not really. We train you to notice when the world shifts 1 inch to the left and pretends it hasn't. He slides the parchment toward you. It's blank. Study it, he says. Then burn it. You nod again. You understand. The message is invisible, but not unreadable. You'll need steam, maybe lemon juice. Maybe heat from a candle. You'll figure it out. You're dismissed. Back in your bunk, you light a taper, gently warm the scroll. As the parchment darkens, faint writing emerges. 3 words. Begin your silence. Your heart skips. That night, dinner is back to boiled root stew and crusty end bits of bread, and no one sobs in gratitude. But the silence at your table feels heavier now. You watch each face. You listen to each scrape of spoon on bowl. You feel yourself shift. And somewhere, deep in your belly, the pomegranate seed still lingers like a promise. You don't speak the next morning. Not a word. Not even the usual whispered groans as your bones creak into the waking cold. Your bunkmate says something about the frost on the window. You nod, but your mouth stays sealed. Silence, after all, is part of the message. You go about your duties like a ghost who pays rent. You sweep without a sigh. You serve breakfast, a dull mash of barley and unseasoned beans, without complaint. You even take 2 extra shifts carrying buckets from the well. And nobody thanks you, because in this place, doing well is suspicious. Speaking well is worse. It's the 3rd bucket trip that gets you noticed. As you're pouring water into the kitchen cistern, a figure appears behind the hanging curtain. The traveling man. He watches without comment. Just that same faint smile, like he knows something is about to fall from the ceiling. Then he vanishes again. You feel it now. The air's different around you. Like you've stepped through an invisible curtain. People start treating you oddly. Not kinder, just like you've caught a fever they don't want to catch. Less eye contact. Fewer orders barked directly at you. One of the junior brothers even stops mid-insult. You start to wonder, how much of this is real? How much is theater? Historians still argue whether aspirants in medieval cloistered orders were placed under observation before official initiation, or if that's just a romantic exaggeration fed by popular fiction. But when you walk into the armory after lunch and find your name carved, not painted, carved, into the underside of a weapons rack, you stop doubting. This is real. They're watching, and testing, and probably laughing at your quiet boy with a mop routine. Your reward for silence comes that evening, not food. A task. One of the kitchen hands slips you a note, pressed into a crust of old bread. You crack it open. Inside, written in cramped letters. 3rd garden. After bells. Bring no light. You know the 3rd garden. It's not really a garden. More like a neglected stone courtyard with 2 dying bushes and a well that supposedly whispers your name if you lean in long enough. You've never heard it whisper anything, except maybe you should have studied carpentry instead. So when the bells ring for evening prayers, you take a different route. Not through the chapel, not through the refectory. You sneak behind the herb cellar, careful to stay in the shadows. The 3rd garden waits like a held breath. He's already there. The traveling man again. Now sitting on the well's edge like it's a throne. You approach without speaking. You're adapting well, he says, voice low. But you still chew too loudly. You try not to smile. He gestures beside him. You sit. Cold stone presses into your thighs. The night air smells of rain that hasn't fallen yet. Do you know why we use silence, he asks. You shrug slightly. It's not just stealth, or discipline, or mysticism. Silence is what separates the reactive from the observant. It's a filter. Noise dulls the world, but silence sharpens it. He drops a small bundle onto your lap. Wrapped in linen, tied with string. Inside, dried fruits. Figs, mostly. And a single strip of honeyed pork. You nearly cry. That's not hyperbole. After weeks of gruel, this is luxury. Each fig is a soft explosion of sun and time. The pork, warm even without heat. Salty, smoky, and sweet. You chew slowly, barely breathing. He says nothing more. You sit in the dark and eat. You begin to understand food here is language. Mainstream medieval history books often focus on kings, wars, and treaties, not the significance of meals in subcultures like monastic assassins. But in your world, food carries code. It marks rank, purpose, mood. Yesterday's pomegranate wasn't a treat. It was a whisper of transformation. Tonight's pork is a nod. We see you. After the meal, you're given another task. Dig up the grave of Brother Alric, the man says. You blink. Not the real one, he adds. The fake one. South corner of the cemetery. Under the thorn bush. Ah, much better. You find a spade and head out under the sliver moonlight. The cemetery wall is low, but the chill is high. You duck past the sleeping guard dog, who doesn't bark because you've been feeding him extra scraps all week. Always befriend the animals. Always. The thorn bush looks like it hasn't been disturbed in decades. But you start to dig. Quietly. The earth here is stubborn, more rocks than soil. Your fingers blister quickly, but you don't stop. After what feels like hours, but is probably less than one, you hit wood. A small box, rotting at the corners, sealed with a metal clasp. You lift it out. It weighs less than expected. Inside, a loaf of bread, completely black, hardened, moldy, disgusting, and underneath, folded in cloth, a ring. Silver, shaped like a serpent eating its tail. The Ouroboros, a symbol of eternity, yes, but also of secrets swallowing themselves. You take it. That night, you sleep with the ring in your palm. You don't dream. The next morning, the silence ends. At breakfast, you're asked to recite the litany of Saint Theodos. You do. Clearly. No hesitation. When the instructors bark orders during training, you reply with a yes, brother. That feels heavier in your throat now. You speak, but with intention, as if every word weighs silver. And when you're called into the great hall later that evening, there are no scrolls. No riddles. Just a single plate of food on a stone pedestal. Flatbread. Goat cheese. 3 olives. A single dried fig. You know exactly what this is. It's your induction meal. It's not flashy. Not meant to impress. But it's a signal you've stepped across the threshold, from observer to participant. From boy with chores to apprentice with a name. Historians debate whether real medieval assassin guilds had ceremonies, or if initiates simply slipped in, unnoticed by the rest. Some argue that ritual was crucial, that symbolic acts tied memory to identity. Others say no, too much risk. Better to keep it mundane. But here, in this stone hall that smells of sweat, wax, and secrets, your initiation is both invisible and unforgettable. Because the next morning, nobody mentions it. No one congratulates you. Except for the traveling man. As he rides out through the main gate, he glances back once and mouths a single word. Soon. You're left staring at the empty space he used to fill, knowing that soon could mean anything. A mission. A test. A reckoning. You go back to your chores. But now you chew quietly. And listen even quieter. You find the maggot in your breakfast the next day. Not the metaphorical kind, not the whisper of rot hiding in a kitchen corner, but a real, wiggling, well-fed maggot smack in the middle of your barley mash. It stares at you. You stare back. You don't scream or complain, or even push the bowl away. You just tilt it slightly, let the little guest slide to the edge, and flick it onto the floor. It lands without a sound. A nearby chicken, yes, the same one who wandered into the dormitory last week, snatches it with a satisfied cluck. Problem solved. Brother Marius, who watches over the food hall like a dragon guarding a pile of bland, chewy gold, nods once. That was a test. Of what? Who knows? Maybe your stomach. Maybe your nerves. You keep eating. Of course you do. This is how mornings go now. You wake with the bell, slide into your routine like it's a worn glove, and eat whatever's put in front of you without question. Be it turnip stew, oat gruel, or suspiciously gamey pigeon. Breakfast isn't about pleasure. It's about proof. Your body is being shaped, yes, but so is your mind. Your responses. Your limits. Historians often highlight the elaborate banquets of the medieval elite, but rarely talk about the consistent, austere diet of those training in secret orders. Bread, legumes, sometimes salted fish, if it was cheap. Some say the monotony was intentional. Predictability in food meant unpredictability in thought. Or, at the very least, fewer surprise trips to the latrines during morning drills. But every so often, there's a shift. Like today. After chores, you're summoned to the storage cellar. A cold, quiet place usually meant for pickled onions and monks who need a stern talking to. Inside, 3 men. One is Brother Silvo, the quartermaster who never makes eye contact. The second, a scribe whose name you never caught because he speaks in riddles. The third new. Tall. Smells faintly of cloves and iron. You're handed a basket. In it, eggs, 3 loaves of bread, a sliver of white cheese, and a wax-sealed jar of honey. Good honey. Rich, dark, thick like slow-moving lava. Deliver this to the widow Alma, Silvo says, his voice a dry twig. You blink. The widow lives outside the walls. Beyond the gate. They're letting you leave. You nod, gripping the basket tightly. They don't escort you. Just open the small south gate and watch you go. It's the first time in weeks, maybe months, that you smell the forest. The Real forest. Damp leaves. Old pine. Something rotten in the distance, but not your concern. You walk the narrow trail, twisting through hawthorn and bramble, careful not to step on mushrooms that might fight back. The basket swings gently. The eggs click against each other. Your stomach grumbles in protest. After an hour's walk, you see her cottage, half swallowed by ivy, smoke curling from the chimney. A chicken perches on the roof like a sleepy gargoyle. You knock. The door creaks open. Widow Alma is tiny, smaller than you remember. Her eyes are bright, sharp, and much too aware. Took you long enough, she mutters, grabbing the basket. You didn't drop the eggs, did you? No, you say. First word spoken all morning. Your voice cracks like old wood. She doesn't thank you. Just grunts and hobbles back inside. You follow. Her home smells of herbs and burnt sugar. Bottles line every surface. Some glow faintly. One has a beetle trapped inside that's too large for comfort. You're here to watch, not talk, she says, already stirring something in a cauldron. So watch. What follows is breakfast. But not for you. She prepares something for someone else. Not you. Not her. The eggs are cracked into a clay bowl, whisked with crushed nettle and a dusting of ground berries. Bread is sliced thin, laid carefully on a charred slate. The cheese, not cow, not goat, but something she doesn't name, is melted into the eggs over fire, turned with a twig instead of a spoon. She spoons the mixture into 2 wooden bowls. One she sets by the fire. The other she takes outside. You follow, to a stone beneath the oak tree. A flat stone, scorched at the edges. She places the bowl atop it with ritual care, then pours a spoonful of honey into the grass beside it. Offerings, she mutters. Keeps the watchers from whispering too loud. You sit silently. This is the kind of moment the monastery never explained. She turns to you. You eat too much barley. You blink. Barley makes you slow, she says. Tired. It dulls the eye. Not good for sharp things. Then, for the first time, she hands you something of her own, a biscuit. Small. Flat. Green speckled. You bite. It tastes like rosemary and smoke, and maybe regret. And energy. Real, slow-burning, mind-awakening energy. Fringe food historians love talking about the witch's pantry. Unusual herbs and wild grains mixed by women on the margins of medieval society. Stuff like stone seed, wild rye, fermented pine pollen. Not officially illegal, but definitely weird enough to get you watched. You eat the biscuit in 3 bites. Widow Alma nods. You'll run better now. Before you leave, she hands you a tiny sack of dried seeds. For when barley fails you, she says. Then, with no further farewell, she shuts the door. You make it back to the monastery just before dusk. No one questions your absence. No one even acknowledges it. At supper, you're served, of course, barley mash, with a side of boiled turnips. You eat slowly. Your body doesn't crave it anymore. Not like before. That biscuit rewired something. And now you see how dull the food really is. How predictable. You chew, but you're thinking of spice. Of ash. Of honey that bites back. Later that night, you sneak out to the garden and plant 2 of the seeds from Alma's pouch. Just in case. That's when you notice the shadow watching you. Not human. Not animal. Just presence. Like fog that thinks too much. It lingers behind the chapel's north wall. Doesn't move. Doesn't speak. You blink and it's gone. But you know now, something's changed. You go back to bed with the aftertaste of rosemary still tingling on your tongue. Your dreams scattered between oaks and spoons and offerings placed where eyes don't see. You wake up chewing. Not food air. But your jaw is grinding like you're working through tough meat. And your tongue's pressed to the roof of your mouth like it remembers the shape of that green speckled biscuit. The ghost of taste lingers, herbs and burnt crust still blooming behind your molars. You sit up slowly. No bell yet. No footsteps. The world is thick with the kind of silence only found before dawn. Even the chickens are too tired to judge you. You wrap your blanket around your shoulders and shuffle out of the dormitory. The floorboards creak like they're telling secrets to each other. Outside, the monastery garden is soaked in mist. You step barefoot into the dirt, right where you planted Alma's seeds the night before. You half expect them to have sprouted overnight, glowing, humming, hatching small riddles. But no, the earth is still. Damp. Undisturbed. Just dirt for now. Back in the kitchen, the cook is already stoking the fire. He nods at you without really looking, then hands you a bowl. Barley mash again. Of course. But this time, he adds a pinch of something yellow, saffron maybe. Or just egg yolk pretending to be fancy. He doesn't say why. You don't ask. As you eat, the room fills with others, shuffling in with the weight of repetition on their backs. You chew slowly, watching them. The way their eyes flicker awake, their hands move with muscle memory. No one complains. No one jokes. No one talks about widow Alma or stone altars or how your fingers still smell like rosemary and new beginnings. After breakfast, it's time for the new routine. Silence, sharpening, sparring. The sparring is more brutal now. Less like play. Less like pretend you're defending a merchant's donkey from bandits. And more like, you probably won't walk straight tomorrow. They pair you with Lute again. Lute of the busted nose. He grins through cracked lips and swings like someone's chasing him in a nightmare. Your blade meets his in a clang that shakes your wrist. The impact travels up your spine, rattles your brain like dice in a monk's pocket. You parry. Strike. Mississippi duck. Kick. Catch a knee in the ribs and see a sudden vision of the honey jar spilling in slow motion. The fight ends when you knock him into the water trough. He comes up gasping, then laughing. You don't laugh. Not yet. Something in you hasn't stopped fighting. Good biscuit, huh? He says. You blink. You know about Alma? He grins, wiping mud from his eyes. We all go eventually. Just don't talk about it. Makes the cook feel bad. Of course. Makes sense now. The eggs. The honey. The silent test. The seed exchange. It's all part of the curriculum no one writes down. That afternoon, they send you on another errand. This time to the butcher's cottage just beyond the creek. You brace yourself. Medieval butchers were the weird kids of the tradesman family. Half doctor, half executioner, with a sense of humor that leaned heavily on the practical side of bloodletting. They knew more about anatomy than most university scribes, but don't expect bedside manners or fresh linen. When you arrive, the butcher, old Torm, doesn't look up from his work. He's elbow deep in something hairy and four-legged. You're late, he grunts. Grab the cleaver. You obey. He teaches you to deb one a rabbit, then a goose. Then, just when you think you're safe, a pig's head. There's breakfast in everything, he says, stripping fat from jowl. If you know where to look. Torm explains how poor folk made sausages from lungs and spleens, stuffing them with barley and spiced blood. How liver pate, made right, could make a blind priest propose marriage. And how fermented fish paste could power a monk through 3 days of fasting if he didn't smell it too hard. You wonder, mid-slice, whether any of this will end up in your bowl tomorrow. One of the more debated topics in culinary history is whether assassins, particularly monastic ones, ever poison-proofed themselves. You've heard whispers of boys drinking snake venom in tiny doses, nibbling on foxglove leaves, or fermenting their own bodily fluids in honey jars. Historians still argue whether these practices were real or just romantic tales told by bored scribes. Torm says, wiping his hands on a rag that definitely used to be white. But me, I say, if your breakfast can kill you, you're probably doing it right. By the time you return to the monastery, your apron is blood-speckled, and your hands smell like iron and garlic. You skip supper, just not hungry. Instead, you sneak into the apothecary room, where jars line every wall like sleepy soldiers. You pull out one at random, crushed fennel and mint. Another, dried mushrooms labeled with a skull symbol and a warning in Latin. You don't read Latin. Probably important. Eventually, you find something wrapped in waxed linen. You open it, biscuits. Alma's kind. The real stuff. Someone's been keeping a stash. You take one. You also leave one of your own seeds in the jar. A trade. That night, you dream of knives growing from trees, eggs hatching into glowing cats, and widow Alma riding a chicken the size of a horse across the monastery roof. When you wake, it's already late. No bell. No cook. No barley mash. Something's off. You rush outside to find Brother Silvo pacing near the dormitory. Where were you? He asks, and his voice actually has emotion this time. Panic, maybe. You're not sure. They've gone, he says. Lute. And 3 others. Sent out before dawn. A mission. Your heart thumps against your ribs. Missions are real. You thought maybe they were just rumors. Whispers of boys vanishing into the woods and never coming back. Or returning with a 1,000-yard stare and a limp. You weren't ready, Silvo says. Yet, you look down at your hands. Still crusted with dried pig's blood. A part of you disagrees. But you nod. That night, you eat alone in the garden. One last biscuit. And a spoonful of honey stolen from the cellar. Not because you're hungry, but because you know now. Every breakfast means something. Even when it's quiet. Even when it's boiled barley. Even when you have to flick the maggots out. You're on tea duty today. You think that sounds soft. Like you'll spend the morning steeping leaves and humming near a fireplace while old monks mumble over scrolls. Nope. Turns out tea, in your particular medieval outpost, isn't so much a beverage as it is an ordeal. You're handed a woven basket and pointed toward the hills before sunrise. For herbs, Brother Silvo says. And don't confuse the goose grass with the spurge this time. You nod solemnly, pretending you didn't already forget which one gives you hives. So you go. You head past the brook, past the old willow that leans like it's permanently whispering a secret, and into the wilds. This is the monastery's green pantry. Not a neat garden, but an untamed sprawl of plant life. Mossy, mushroomy, unpredictable. You get to work, crouching low, your hands moving through dew-wet foliage. You pluck lemon balm, chamomile, mint, yarrow, and something that smells like disappointment. Your fingers stain green, your knees go numb, and your nose starts twitching from pollen overload. As you search, you think of something Torm said the day before. Breakfast begins with what doesn't bite back. And this gathering, foraging, guessing, is the other side of that coin. Sure, some mornings start with meat and fire. But others? They start here. With leaves, roots, flowers. The bits you boil, sip, and pray don't kill you. Back at the monastery, you deliver your bounty to the tea mistress. You didn't even know there was a tea mistress until now. She's ancient, like parchment with a heartbeat, and has eyebrows that look like they belong to a barn owl. She doesn't say thank you. Just hums softly as she sorts the leaves, pinches the good ones, burns the bad ones, and mashes a few others into powder. What's that one for? You ask, pointing to the powder. She squints at you. Dreamless sleep, she says. Or death. Depends on the dosage. Right. You step back. Later that day, you get your first actual tea-making lesson. The monks, you learn, don't just drink tea. They study it. They blend it with a level of care usually reserved for relics or secret maps. Every leaf has a purpose. Some sharpen your focus. Others calm your nerves. One, called bitter root, can make you hallucinate that you're inside your own stomach, which apparently helps with digestion. Allegedly. You're told about the teas served on the mornings before missions, dark, earthy brews laced with ash, ginger, and sometimes the powdered bone of a rabbit's left foot. It's not superstition. It's strategy. Keeps your stomach quiet. Sharpens your hearing. If it also gives you the sense that clouds are whispering to you, bonus. You also learn that medieval assassins were not caffeine junkies in the modern sense, but they did rely on herbal stimulants. Ginseng, nettle, and occasionally ground chicory root made appearances in their morning routine. Coffee. Rare. Expensive. Exotic. But every now and then, a weary traveler would arrive with a pouch of it tucked beneath his tunic like a precious jewel. Historians still argue whether certain monasteries cultivated their own psychoactive herbs. The tea mistress murmurs as she grinds dried petals with a stone. But our tongues remember. That night, you're allowed to serve the first bowl. You pour the tea, an amber liquid with floating specks of clove and dried marigold, into small clay cups. You walk slowly through the hall, placing a cup beside each monk, like you're handing out tiny sunsets. When you return to your place, there's one left for you. You sit cross-legged, breathe in the scent, wood smoke and lemon, and sip. It tastes like the forest floor after rain, like the silence right before dawn, like something you once knew in a dream but forgot on purpose. Then your nose starts to tingle. Your ears hum, and oddly you feel taller. Not literally, more like your bones sit straighter, like you belong inside them a bit more securely tonight. That's the tea working. Sleep comes fast after that, deep, untroubled. You don't dream of Widow Alma or giant chicken mounts or even biscuits. You just sleep, like a rock, or a well-fed dragon. The next morning, breakfast is different again. There's a mash. Yes, always a mash, but it's dark, sticky, sweet. You ask the cook what's in it. He shrugs. Figs, a bit of ale. Crushed bee larvae. You pause mid-spoon. Bee larvae. Good for strength, he says matter of fact. Better than eggs. And they don't argue when you take them. You eat it. It's crunchy in a way porridge should never be. While you chew, the abbot arrives, robes pristine, beard majestic, energy unsettlingly alert. He doesn't usually visit the kitchen. Everyone freezes mid-bite. He speaks quietly to the cook, then turns and looks straight at you. Herb duty again, he says. But further this time. Past the old quarry. You nod. Of course. Except this time, Silvo hands you a pouch of biscuits and a dagger. Just in case, he says. You head out with the sun behind you and the quarry yawning ahead. The land changes here. Less friendly. The plants look sharper. You notice how some flowers lean away from you as you pass. As you gather herbs, you keep one hand near your dagger. Not because you expect bandits, but because something about this place feels watched. Eventually, you find what you came for, wild thyme. The good kind, laced with purple. Bees hover lazily around it, as if debating whether you deserve it. You harvest quickly, respectfully, and just as you stand, you spot it, a dark, squat mushroom tucked beneath a rock. Ugly thing. Looks like a fist made of soot. You don't touch it. Back at the monastery, the tea mistress takes one look at your thyme and smiles. A small thing, like a crack in stone. Now, she says, you've brought breakfast worth brewing. She adds it to the pot. The tea turns gold. You're allowed to taste it first. This time, it tastes like clarity. Like hearing a bell ring 2 towns away. Like knowing someone's about to lie and already forgiving them for it. You smile. And for the first time, so does she. You're woken by bells. Not the soft, come pray and ponder bells. The loud ones. There's someone's at the gate and they don't look friendly bells. You jolt upright, still full of last night's thyme tea and biscuit dreams, and run to the courtyard. The monks are already in formation, robes flapping, arms tucked into sleeves like birds hiding their claws. The gates creak open. It's a merchant caravan. Dusty, loud, and humming with energy. They don't look dangerous, but they also don't look like they're just here to sell ribbons and roasted nuts. You watch closely. The leader, a woman in a blue tunic spattered with road mud, steps forward. She carries a scroll in one hand and a falcon on the other. Casual. They're here for trade, yes. But more than that, they bring news. Whispers. Rumors. Murmurs about a northern prince who choked on spiced pears. About a baker in Toledo who poisoned 6 guards with a custard tart. About an assassin who wore a rosary of walnuts and vanished into a convent. The monks, ever stoic, nod politely. But inside, they're eating up every word. Because food, you see, isn't just fuel in your world. It's a signal. A message. A method. And breakfast? Breakfast can be a warning. Or a weapon. Later, you help unload some of the trade goods. Sacks of dried cherries, smoked trout packed in salt, bundles of foreign spices that make your nose curl. There's also something strange, a small, locked chest lined with cold stone. What's in there? You ask the merchant. She shrugs. I don't ask. I just deliver. That night, you're summoned by the monks of the 5th chamber. They're the ones who test suspicious food before anyone important eats it. Basically, professional tasters with a side hustle in antidotes. They call it first bite duty. You sit on a low stool in a narrow room. The walls are stone but warm. A candle flickers overhead. In front of you, a tiny tray with 5 items. One looks like a figure, one might be a mushroom. One is suspiciously gelatinous. You're told to eat only half of each. Wait 2 minutes. Then the next. You do. The fig is sweet. Too sweet. Your teeth tingle. But nothing happens. The mushroom tastes like charcoal dipped in regret. Your tongue goes numb, just a little. But still you breathe. The gelatin? You gag. It wiggles down your throat like it's trying to escape mid-swallow. You blink hard. But again, no immediate death. The monks scribble notes. Historians still argue whether medieval food tasters were always volunteers. One of them says as you wash your mouth out with mint water. You make a fine case for yes. You're not sure if that's praise or a threat. The next morning, you're back in the kitchen. But today's not for tea or porridge. Today is for testing transport food. See, when assassins traveled, they didn't exactly have roadside diners or corner pubs. They carried what they could. Meats salted to the point of shoe leather. Hard cheeses that doubled as bricks. Flatbread so tough it could break a tooth unless you soaked it in something first. Ale, broth, rainwater, tears. Your task is simple. Sample each item and make a note of what still tastes like food and what now qualifies as archaeology. You bite into something called hunter's bread. It's dense, heavy, made with barley, honey, vinegar, and allegedly dust from the heel of a saint. It crumbles like wet stone, but it fills your belly. Then there's jerky, tougher than ambition. You chew until your jaw clicks. It tastes like smoke and iron and the distant memory of an animal that regrets all its choices. Some of the monks swear by dried apples dipped in salted butter. It's oddly good, sweet, savory. You feel like a noble for half a second. Finally, you try sleep cakes, small, round, anise-flavored. These aren't for travel energy. They're for knocking you out. If you eat 2, you sleep through a thunderstorm. 3, and you might wake up with a beard someone drew on your face. No one tells you what for do. You write notes. Rate the edibility. Leave polite suggestions. Then, someone passes you a pouch with a single wrapped item. You unfold it. A hard-boiled egg. Simple. Unassuming. But here's the twist. It's painted red. Not with dye. With crushed berries and something else. Vinegar? Iron filings? You sniff it. It smells like vengeance. This one's ceremonial, a monk says. Symbolic. Represents the blood of betrayal. You nod very slowly and put it back in the pouch. Turns out, even breakfast can be poetic. That afternoon, you help prepare a trial meal for a recruit. He doesn't know it's a test. He's just told to sit and eat, which he does, eagerly, sloppily. He devours everything. Doesn't question the meat. Doesn't ask where the cheese came from. Doesn't notice the strange spice dusted on the crust of the bread. Afterward, he's told, you just failed. Because in this world, to eat without pause is dangerous. Real assassins taste with suspicion. They chew like thinkers. They swallow like gamblers. And now you do too. That evening, the merchant woman with the falcon returns. She hands a small pouch to the abbot and leaves without a word. You're there, close enough to hear the flap of her cloak as she vanishes into dusk. The abbot opens the pouch. Inside, a tiny cake, wrapped in linen, stamped with the crest of a king. No note, no message, just the cake. He cuts it carefully, smells it, licks the edge. Then he doesn't eat it. He burns it, just tosses it into the fire like it's paper. Lesson, he says, without looking at you. Not everything offered is meant for the mouth. Later that night, you sit alone with a cup of nettle tea thinking. About figs laced with lies. About tarts that whisper. About the quiet language of breakfasts made by people who never, ever assume a meal is innocent. And somehow it all makes sense. Even the red egg. Even the biscuits with crushed bee parts. Even the jerky that could double as armor. Because when food is your first weapon, and also your first shield, breakfast stops being the start of the day. It becomes the first negotiation. You wake up slowly, the room still heavy with the smell of smoked meat and damp straw. The sun filters weakly through the rough wooden slats of your quarters, and you rub the sleep from your eyes. Today is different. Today, you learn what medieval assassins packed for their longest, darkest missions. Because, surprise, there was more to their breakfast than just sitting down to a quiet bowl of porridge. You trudge into the kitchen, where a small fire crackles beneath a blackened cauldron. The air is thick with the mingling scents of herbs, cured meats, and something slightly sulfurous. You realize this place smells like an old cheese shop that secretly dabbles in alchemy. Before you on the table lies an array of dried goods. Thick slabs of cured pork, dense rye bread, a small pouch of dried figs, and a curious little bundle wrapped in wax paper. The abbot, still with that gleam in his eye that suggests he knows far more than he's letting on, motions for you to begin. You'll want to start with the preserved meats, he says. Salted to survive weeks of travel, yet still good enough to remind you what you're fighting for. You bite into the pork. It's salty, chewy, and intensely smoky, the kind of flavor that sticks in your teeth and lingers long after you swallow. There's grit in it, too, the telltale sign of coarse salt and poor filtration. The abbot chuckles. Medieval curing was as much about preservation as it was about punishment. He hands you a slice of rye bread, dark and dense, flecked with bits of caraway seeds. You nibble, and the bitterness of the seeds cuts through the richness of the pork like a tiny, sharp dagger. Travel food had to be robust, he continues. Soft breads would spoil, so rye was the go-to, dense, filling, and sometimes a bit sour. Perfect for a man on the run, or someone who never wants to chew twice. As you work your way through the meal, your mind drifts to the peculiar wax-wrapped bundle. It's small, no bigger than a coin purse, but it feels surprisingly heavy. "What's this?" you ask. The abbot's smile tightens. "That, my friend, is what I like to call the assassin's secret breakfast." You unwrap it carefully. Inside are 3 tiny cakes, each about the size of a walnut. The texture is gritty, almost sandy, and the scent is faintly nutty with an undercurrent of bitterness. Anise and poppy seeds, the abbot explains. Little bursts of flavor, but more than that, a mild narcotic effect. Keeps you calm in the face of danger. You pop one into your mouth. The flavor blooms quickly, sweet, spicy, and then that hint of bitterness. It settles into a soothing warmth, like a lullaby for your nerves. Historians still argue whether these cakes were meant more for calming nerves or dulling pain, the abbot says. But what we do know is that they were a staple for anyone needing to keep their wits about them. You swallow, feeling a slight wave of drowsiness, the edges of your thoughts softening. You laugh quietly, imagining a medieval assassin trying to sneak through castle halls with a mouth full of these sleepy sweets. But wait, the abbot interrupts your daydream. There's more. He reaches into a small wooden box and pulls out a handful of dried herbs and roots. The pungent smell hits you immediately, a mix of thyme, mugwort, and something earthy and bitter you can't place. This, he says, was used to make a tea. Not just any tea, mind you. One that sharpens your senses, quickens your reflexes, and if you believe the old tales, lets you see in the dark. You raise an eyebrow. The abbot winks. Historians still argue whether the night vision tea was fact or folklore. But if you're an assassin, do you really want to take chances? You prepare the brew. The liquid is dark amber, steaming gently as you sip. The flavor is complex, herbal, slightly bitter, with a surprising hint of sweetness at the end. You feel a faint buzz, as if your brain has woken up and is now pacing impatiently in your skull. You picture assassins in the shadows of cathedrals, the steam from their secretive breakfasts mingling with the cold night air. Maybe they believed in the magic of the tea, or maybe it was just good old caffeine. If caffeine had been known in Europe before the New World. You ask the abbot about this, and he just shrugs. Historians still argue about when caffeine really arrived in Europe. But one thing's clear. People have always found ways to wake themselves up before a job. You nod, feeling your own senses sharpen as the tea takes effect. Before you leave the kitchen, the abbot hands you a small, strange object. A piece of blackened bread, charred on one side and smeared with a thick paste of crushed garlic and fermented fish sauce. You wrinkle your nose. This is called garum, the abbot says. Not exactly breakfast fare by today's standards, but back then it was liquid gold. You take a tentative bite. The flavor punches you, salty, fishy, with a tang that makes your eyes water. It's an acquired taste, to say the least, but you sense the power in it. The kind of flavor that lingers on your tongue, reminding you that medieval breakfasts weren't always gentle awakenings. Sometimes they were strategic battles. You realize that every bite, every ingredient was a tool, a weapon, a messenger. The salty pork told tales of long roads and harsh winters. The rye bread spoke of endurance and the harsh earth it grew from. The sleepy cakes whispered of nerves on edge and the quiet terror before a mission. The night vision tea hinted at secrets hidden in the dark. And the garum? That was the sharp sting of survival, raw, real, and utterly unforgettable. You imagine the assassins themselves sitting alone in taverns, chewing on these foods, plotting, waiting. Their breakfasts were never about comfort. They were about readiness, about becoming invisible ghosts in a world where a misplaced crumb could mean death. As you finish the last of your meal, the abbot looks at you with a twinkle. Remember, he says softly, food was just the start. What you ate before dawn could decide if you lived to see the next sunset. You sip your tea, nodding slowly. And with that, you realize breakfast isn't just the first meal of the day. It's the first line of defense in a deadly game of patience, skill, and survival. The morning haze begins to lift as you follow the abbot down a narrow stone corridor, the faint drip of water echoing softly off the walls. You think back to that sleepy warmth from the cakes, anise and poppy, the quiet lull before the storm. Now, the lesson shifts from what the assassins ate to how their meals shaped the mysterious lives they led in shadows and silence. You step into a small courtyard, where the smell of fresh herbs and damp earth mingles in the cool air. The abbot gestures toward a neat garden bursting with fragrant plants, sage, rosemary, and something darker, almost sinister, hemlock. Your stomach twists. Hemlock, you remember, was the poison that ended Socrates' conversations forever. You catch the abbot's knowing look. Medieval assassins were part chef, part alchemist, part shadow dancer, he says, voice low and conspiratorial. Their breakfast wasn't just food. It was a complex potion, a survival toolkit. You kneel beside the herbs, brushing your fingers over the leaves, trying to catch their scent. Sage, earthy and sharp, tingles on your skin. The abbot smiles. Sage was a favorite, not just for flavor, but for preservation. It helped keep meat from spoiling on long trips. Plus, it was thought to ward off evil spirits. A little superstitious, maybe, but who's counting? You bite your lip, trying to imagine an assassin sprinkling sage over his pork before slipping silently into the night. The image is almost absurd. And yet, there it is, the mix of practical and mystical in every morsel. Nearby, sprigs of rosemary stand tall, their needle-like leaves glinting in the weak sun. The abbot plucks one and crushes it between his fingers, releasing a burst of piney fragrance. Rosemary, he says, was believed to sharpen memory and focus. Perfect for someone who needed to remember secret routes, coded messages, or the exact moment to strike. You smile at the thought of a sleepy assassin drinking rosemary tea, trying desperately not to forget the name of the duke he's supposed to. Well, never mind. But then your eyes settle on the hemlock, its delicate white flowers belying its deadly nature. Now, this is where it gets complicated, the abbot murmurs. Hemlock was used sparingly and with great care. A trace in the right dish could be lethal, but handled wrongly, it could kill the cook too. Historians still argue whether assassins actually used hemlock in their meals, or if that's just legend. You imagine the tension, the thin line between life and death resting in a pinch of powder. The abbot suddenly crouches and pulls a small, leather-bound book from his robe. You lean closer, intrigued. It's a crude recipe book, pages yellowed and fragile, ink faded. The scribbles are mostly illegible, but here and there, you spot names of herbs paired with cryptic instructions. You see, he says, tracing a shaky finger along a recipe for a stamina stew. These meals weren't just about feeding the body. They were meant to prepare the assassin's mind and muscles for long hours of waiting, running, or hiding. You imagine the stew bubbling over a fire, rich with wild mushrooms, onions, and who knows what else. A meal designed to keep someone quiet and strong for days on end. You can almost hear the whispered conversations between cooks and killers, debating how much garlic is too much, or whether a dash of nightshade might sharpen reflexes, or just poison the dinner. The abbot's eyes gleam as he closes the book. Did you know, he says, that in some circles, breakfast was the only time an assassin would eat with company? A quick, tense ritual before dissolving into the shadows. Food was fuel, but also a moment of fragile camaraderie. You imagine a cramped tavern room, shadows playing across faces as they eat salted fish and hard bread, whispering rumors and instructions, knowing that tomorrow might be the last sunrise some of them see. And then there's the matter of water. The abbot points to a clay jug nearby. Water was precious. Sometimes they used wine diluted with herbs to kill bacteria. But there was a catch: too much wine, and your reflexes slow. Not ideal if someone is trying to slit your throat. You chuckle softly, thinking about assassins stumbling home tipsy, missing their mark by a mile. Historians still argue whether medieval assassins preferred their wine neat or their water spiked, the abbot adds with a grin. Your stomach rumbles, and you realize this strange breakfast journey has stirred more than just curiosity. You ask about breakfast rituals beyond the food. Any customs or superstitions? The abbot nods, his voice dropping to a whisper. Many assassins carried a small charm or talisman with their meal. Some believed that eating in the presence of a protective symbol, like a carved bone or a piece of iron, would shield them from curses or misfortune. Others ate facing a certain direction, or began with a silent prayer to saints known for protection. You picture a cold morning, an assassin clutching a tiny wooden cross, whispering a prayer over his bread before disappearing into a misty alley. Food was security, comfort, and magic all rolled into one, the abbot says softly. As you look around the garden, you realize that breakfast for medieval assassins wasn't a simple meal, but a ritual layered with meaning, caution, and hope. Every bite was an act of preparation, every herb a whispered prayer. You swallow, feeling the weight of those ancient mornings, the quiet before the storm, the fragile peace in a world full of danger. And you know that somewhere, in the shadowy corners of history, those breakfasts shaped more than just hungry bodies. They shaped destinies. You follow the abbot as the morning light grows softer, slipping through narrow windows to illuminate a row of worn wooden tables. The scent of toasted barley and burnt wood hangs in the air, mingling with something faintly metallic, like old coins or forgotten secrets. Here, you realize, is where the story of what medieval assassins ate for breakfast begins to bend toward the unexpected. Not just the food itself, but the strange, sometimes bizarre rituals surrounding it. The abbot gestures toward a battered iron pot simmering gently on a small fire. This, he says, is a kind of porridge that might not look like much but was a staple for many living in the shadows. You lean in, eyes narrowing at the thick, grayish mush inside. It's barley-based, cooked long and slow, perhaps with a splash of honey or a handful of dried berries when they could afford it. You can almost taste the gritty texture and imagine the quiet hunger gnawing at an assassin's belly on a cold dawn. The thing about porridge, the abbot continues, is that it was cheap, filling, and adaptable. It could be sweet, savory, or laced with herbs and roots to calm nerves or sharpen senses. You remember the rosemary from the garden and picture it stirred into this steaming bowl, its piney scent rising in the chill air. The abbot's eyes twinkle as he adds, historians still argue whether the barley was locally grown or traded along secret routes, but one thing's certain. Porridge was the humble breakfast of the underground. He pauses, lowering his voice as if sharing a forbidden recipe. But here's where it gets interesting. Some assassins believed that certain additions to their breakfast could protect them, not from the obvious threats, but from curses or the ill will of vengeful spirits. You raise an eyebrow. Like what? Well, he says with a slight grin, some sprinkled crushed bones from specific animals into their porridge. Rabbit bones for agility, wolf bones for ferocity. Others added powdered ambergris, a rare oceanic substance, said to bring invisibility, or at least the illusion of it. You try to wrap your head around the idea of nibbling on pulverized bones and mysterious ocean scents before heading out to murder nobles. The mind reels. And don't forget, he adds, the infamous assassin's pepper. This wasn't your everyday spice, but a blend of rare hot peppers and bitter roots. It cleared the sinuses, increased adrenaline, and sometimes even numbed minor wounds. You cough softly, imagining a killer grimacing as the fiery breakfast scorches the tongue, but steels the nerves for a deadly night ahead. The abbot then lowers his voice further, his eyes scanning the courtyard as if someone might overhear. In fact, some assassins were said to eat their breakfast in complete silence. No laughter, no words, because noise could give them away or disturb the spirits they believed guarded their path. You chuckle at the image of a group of killers sitting stone-faced over their bowls, trying not to sneeze or drop a spoon. But there were exceptions, the abbot says, especially in the infamous order known as the Hashishin, or assassins, as chronicled by medieval travelers. They reportedly enjoyed sweetened wine and fresh fruits before missions, a decadent breakfast that defied the grim stereotype. You pause, surprised. Assassins enjoying wine and fruit? It sounds almost like a breakfast party, if your party included poison, secrecy, and hidden blades. This is one of the biggest debates among historians, the abbot says, waving a hand. Were the Hashishins' breakfasts luxurious because they lived off the fat of the land, or were these accounts exaggerated by travelers trying to romanticize, or demonize, the mysterious sect? You nod slowly, appreciating the blurry line between fact and folklore. Moving away from the fire, the abbot leads you to a small table covered with strange objects. Animal teeth, feathers, a cracked mirror. Breakfast wasn't just about food, he says, but about symbolism. Many assassins believed that carrying certain talismans during their meal would bring protection. Some even performed rituals, like dipping their spoons in holy water or tracing signs of the cross before the first bite. You pick up a small feather, feeling its delicate softness. Did they believe this helped with stealth? Exactly, the abbot replies. Feathers from birds of prey symbolized keen sight and silence. Others used iron, known to ward off evil. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or limited to certain groups. You smile at the thought of someone whispering a prayer over a bowl of porridge, clutching a talisman, and preparing to step into the dark. Then the abbot pauses, eyes narrowing as he reaches into a pouch at his side. He pulls out a small, rough loaf of bread, dense, coarse, and unassuming. Bread was the backbone of any medieval breakfast, he says, breaking off a piece and handing it to you. You take a bite. It's bland but hearty, with a rough crumb that catches in your throat. Most bread was made from rye or barley, not the soft wheat you're used to. And sometimes it was flavored with caraway or aniseed, giving it a faint licorice note. You remember the cakes from earlier and marvel at the variety. from sweet treats to plain sustenance. The abbot leans in conspiratorially. Some assassins carried small bread loaves infused with dried herbs and tiny pockets of meat or cheese. These were early forms of portable breakfast, like medieval energy bars. You laugh quietly, imagining assassins on the go, munching energy bars while sneaking through shadows. And not all bread was for eating, he adds. Sometimes crumbs were sprinkled on wounds to help them heal or to stop bleeding. Strange, but true. You pause, trying to picture the practicality behind such odd customs. Interestingly, the abbot continues, some accounts suggest that assassins sometimes used food as a weapon. Poisoned bread or cakes could be left as gifts or traps. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just sensational stories. You can't help but wonder, how many breakfasts ended with a silent death instead of a quiet belly? Finally, the abbot guides you to a corner where an old kettle boils quietly. The steam curls upward, smelling faintly of herbs and smoke. Tea and herbal infusions were prized for their calming and sharpening effects, he explains. Whether it was nettle, chamomile, or a bitter concoction of wormwood, these drinks helped assassins manage stress and stay alert. You take a slow sip, savoring the warmth and mild bitterness. Some even believe that these infusions helped cleanse the body of poison or fatigue, he adds. Others thought they could induce visions or prophetic dreams. Historians still debate these claims. You shake your head with a smile. From bone dust to bitter tea, it seems medieval assassins' breakfasts were as complex and mysterious as their secret lives. You feel a quiet appreciation for those mornings, the whispered prayers, the careful blends of herbs, the tension between hunger and danger. And you realize that, more than anything, breakfast was the first quiet battle of the day. A small, fragile moment where life hung in the balance, one bite at a time. You slip deeper into the labyrinth of medieval mornings, where breakfast wasn't just a meal, but a ritual woven with superstition and survival. As you settle in, you notice the subtle shift from simple fare to what you might call the assassin's buffet. A strange assortment of bites and sips designed for more than just sustenance. Imagine the assassin sitting quietly in a cold stone chamber or a shadowed tavern, eyeing the small wooden platter before them. Alongside the usual bread and porridge, there's a scattering of smoked fish, often herring or eel, dense with oily richness and preserved through salt and smoke. This wasn't just a tasty treat. It was a clever, practical choice. Fish provided vital protein and omega-3 fatty acids, believed to keep the mind sharp and the hands steady. You remember those oily, smoky smells from the harbor markets you visited in history documentaries. Imagine that scent mixing with the wood smoke and faint candle wax in a dim room where lives could end with a single whisper. But wait, there's more. The assassin's plate often held a handful of nuts, hazelnuts or walnuts, sometimes crushed and mixed into their porridge or eaten on their own. These little power pellets packed fats and energy, slow-burning fuel for long, tense nights ahead. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, assassin guilds forbade eating almonds, believing their shape resembled tiny daggers, an ill omen before a kill. Historians still argue whether this was an actual rule or a later invention by overly dramatic chroniclers. You smirk, thinking about how even food could become a symbol or a superstition. Almonds as daggers, how medievally poetic. Nearby, a small cup of wine or beer often accompanied breakfast. This isn't the boisterous drink of tavern brawls, but a measured sip, a token of courage and calm. It's easy to picture the assassin savoring a dark ale or diluted wine, careful not to dull their senses, but seeking a gentle edge of bravery. Some manuscripts mention spiced wine, infused with cloves, cinnamon, or even a hint of mandrake root, known for its mild narcotic effects. You lean forward, intrigued. Mandrake root? That's the stuff with legends of screams and magic, right? Indeed. The plant's hallucinogenic qualities made it both a medicine and a mystery, rumored to grant temporary fearlessness or deep dreams. Historians still debate whether assassins really consumed it regularly, or if this was just sensational gossip passed by wandering monks. Speaking of monks, you recall that many assassins had complex relationships with religious orders. Some were excommunicated, others sought blessing, and a few even disguised themselves as monks to move unnoticed. This connection spilled over into their breakfast habits. Holy water wasn't just for rituals. Some assassins sprinkled it on their bread or dipped their spoons in it before eating, hoping for divine protection. You chuckle softly, imagining a group of killers making the sign of the cross over breakfast porridge, trying not to spill their sacred spoonfuls. The abbot once told you about an odd practice called the silent breakfast, where not a single word was uttered during the meal. This was more than just a matter of etiquette. It was a way to maintain concentration and avoid alerting enemies. You picture a row of assassins, faces stern, eyes fixed, swallowing bites in complete silence, the only sound the faint scrape of wooden utensils. The weight of silence itself becomes almost a character in this morning ritual. In some cases, breakfast included fresh herbs, thyme, sage, or marjoram, thought to protect against poison or to steady the nerves. You imagine an assassin crushing a leaf between their fingers, inhaling the earthy aroma, then tossing it into a mug of warm water. Interestingly, some historical accounts hint at more exotic foods too. Dried fruits, candied orange peel, or even sweetened nuts found their way into breakfasts, especially for assassins serving wealthy patrons or operating in Mediterranean climates. These luxuries provided quick energy and, oddly, comfort in a brutal line of work. Here's a quirky note. In some rare texts, assassins are said to have consumed roasted insects, like crickets or locusts, as part of their morning meal. High in protein and easy to catch, these crunchy snacks sound like a modern-day energy bar, but with a medieval twist. Historians still argue whether these insect tales were real or exaggerated attempts to paint assassins as truly otherworldly. You shiver at the thought, but appreciate the resourcefulness. Another essential item was cheese, hard, salty, and long-lasting. Assassins often carried small chunks of aged goat or sheep cheese, perfect for a quick bite when moving through the forests or city alleys. The tangy flavor lingers on your tongue as you imagine biting into a wedge, the sharpness waking your senses before a deadly mission. Now, remember that mysterious porridge from earlier? In some regions, it was made with additions of nettle or burdock root, plants known for their medicinal properties. Nettle, with its sting, was believed to awaken the body, while burdock helped cleanse the blood. The line between food and medicine was blurred, with assassins constantly seeking ways to stay healthy in dangerous environments. You sip an imagined herbal infusion, feeling the warmth spread, calming yet invigorating. Some assassins practiced fasting intermittently, skipping breakfast on purpose to sharpen their focus or to maintain lightness for swift movement. Others believe that eating before a kill could dull their reflexes. Historians still argue whether these fasting practices were common or more the stuff of legend. A final note on drinks. In colder climates, warm mead, a fermented honey drink, sometimes replaced wine or beer. Sweet, thick, and calming, mead helped soothe tired muscles and nerves before a tense day. But beware, too much sweetness could lead to sluggishness, a risk no assassin could afford. You grin at the idea of a sword-wielding killer nursing a mug of honeyed mead, trying to balance relaxation with readiness. To wrap it all up, breakfast for a medieval assassin was far from a bland routine. It was a carefully curated act, combining nutrition, superstition, and strategy. Every bite had a purpose: to fuel the body, calm the mind, and protect against unseen dangers. As you set your imaginary breakfast table in that shadowy medieval room, you realize how oddly intimate this glimpse feels. These quiet moments before chaos were, in a way, the closest thing to peace an assassin might know. And maybe that's the true secret. In the mix of bone dust, bitter herbs, and silent prayers, breakfast was less about food and more about survival. One spoonful at a time. You're still seated at that rough wooden table, the faint light of dawn sneaking through narrow windows, catching dust motes drifting lazily in the cold air. The last crumbs of smoked fish and nuts have vanished, but the story of the assassin's morning isn't quite finished. There's a whole undercurrent of preparation and ritual that runs alongside what was actually on the plate. After the meal, the assassin didn't just leap into action. No, you imagine them lingering a moment longer, perhaps rolling a small ball of bread in their hands, a nervous tick or a way to focus. This was a time for mental sharpening, a practice as vital as eating the right food. Some chroniclers suggest assassins practiced morning meditation or prayers, sometimes invoking saints or shadows, depending on the region and creed. Historians still argue whether these quiet mental exercises were widespread or just the product of romanticized later tales. But you can't deny the logic. In a world where a split second could mean life or death, getting your head straight before the chaos makes all the difference. Speaking of preparation, let's talk gear. Assassins' breakfasts were often accompanied by a routine of inspecting and readying their weapons. You can almost hear the faint clink of daggers being wiped clean, the soft creak of leather being adjusted. The early morning silence was punctuated by careful movements, sharpening blades on whetstones, oiling joints on crossbows, and sometimes even testing poisons on small scraps of bread. Yes, poisons. You remember that infamous tale about a legendary assassin slipping a few drops of hemlock into his morning meal to build immunity. Some scholars suggest this was true, others call it a myth born from fear and misunderstanding. The reality is probably somewhere in between. It makes you think how breakfast wasn't just about food, but also about body conditioning, mental readiness, and risk management. On a lighter note, it's amusing to imagine an assassin grimacing over a particularly bitter herb or wincing at a too spicy condiment, just like anyone else trying to wake up. After all, even professional killers had taste buds and morning grumbles. The broader social context also shaped their breakfast habits. Assassins didn't live in sterile isolation. Many belonged to guilds or secret societies that controlled trade, politics, and information. Breakfast meetings could double as briefings, where subtle nods and coded phrases passed between shadowy figures over shared bread and cheese. These communal meals weren't just about eating. They were about communication, loyalty, and sometimes betrayal. Imagine a dimly lit room, filled with the scent of stale ale and burning tallow, where assassins exchanged information over humble fare. A wrong word or glance could change the course of history. You might chuckle thinking how, in a way, these breakfasts were less about food and more about survival chess played with stomachs full. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some parts of Europe, assassins were known to eat black pudding, a type of blood sausage, as part of their morning ritual. Packed with iron and protein, it was considered a strength food. But to modern palates, it sounds like an acquired taste at best. Some historians still debate how commonly this was eaten, or if it was reserved for special occasions. You imagine the smoky, rich flavor lingering as the assassin steps out into the misty streets, weapons ready, mind sharpened, body fueled. Before you get too comfortable with this image, consider the challenges of medieval food storage. Fresh food was a luxury. Many assassins relied heavily on preserved items, dried meats, salted fish, hard cheeses, foods that could last through harsh winters and long journeys. This necessity shaped not only what they ate, but also how they ate. Sometimes their breakfasts were stolen moments, quick bites snatched from market stalls or pockets filled with jerky and dried fruit. You might picture an assassin darting through crowded medieval bazaars, the scent of roasting meat and fresh bread mingling with the smell of sweat and wood smoke. The need for stealth often conflicted with the desire for a decent meal. Eating too much or the wrong thing risked sluggishness or unwanted attention. An assassin's breakfast was a balancing act between hunger and alertness, nourishment and discretion. Another fascinating detail. Some assassins used their breakfasts to mask the taste of poisons or to introduce antidotes subtly. A sip of sour cider might cover bitterness. A slice of bread soaked in vinegar could dull the edge of a toxin. Historians still debate whether this was a common practice or simply the stuff of spy novels. You grin, imagining an assassin sneaking an antidote pill in between bites of porridge, all while keeping an eye on the room. You might wonder how these shadowy figures sourced their morning provisions. They often relied on sympathetic innkeepers or merchants within their guild network. Some even had secret supply chains, akin to medieval black markets, where rare spices, herbs, and ingredients were traded under the table. This network wasn't just about food but about information and influence, a complex web that fed both body and ambition. And then there's the environment. Breakfast wasn't always inside cozy halls or dim rooms. Sometimes it was eaten outdoors, in cold forests, on misty riverbanks, or in bustling courtyards before slipping away unseen. The chill of the morning air, the distant crow of a rooster, the crunch of leaves underfoot, all these added sensory layers to the assassin's breakfast experience. Imagine biting into a cold, hard piece of bread while watching the sun rise over a sleeping village, knowing the day ahead could end in blood or silence. By now, you're probably appreciating how much a simple meal can tell us about a mysterious life lived in shadows. Breakfast was never just breakfast for these killers. It was a blend of survival, superstition, camaraderie, and quiet defiance against the chaos of their world. So as you drift towards sleep, let these images linger. The smell of smoked fish, the clink of a dagger, the silent nods over shared bread. Remember that even in the darkest corners of history, the smallest rituals, like breakfast, held profound meaning. And if you ever wake hungry in the middle of the night, maybe reach for a nut or a crumb of cheese. Who knows? Perhaps a little medieval assassin spirit will come along for the ride, sharpening your senses and soothing your soul. The dawn has broken fully now, light spilling through the cracks of old wooden shutters and scattering dust motes like tiny golden dancers. You're still with that medieval assassin, standing just beyond the edge of the breakfast table, feeling the chill in the air that no meal could quite chase away. The day's work is waiting, but before plunging into the shadows and whispered secrets, there's something soft and quiet about the moment. A brief pause where all the tension eases, like a sigh before the plunge. In those final moments, you might imagine the assassin performing a small, almost ritualistic act. Maybe a touch to a worn talisman tucked inside a cloak, a silent prayer to a god or spirit no one else understands, or simply a slow, deliberate breath. This moment isn't about food or weapons, but about grounding oneself, a way to anchor the mind and body for what comes next. Historians still argue whether such rituals were common among assassins, or more the stuff of later legend and romantic storytelling. Breakfast, then, was not just about calories or protein. It was a key part of a much larger preparation for the day's work, a work that required focus, precision, and a cold heart. The mundane act of eating was woven deeply into the assassin's mental fabric, the routine serving as a silent rehearsal for the deadly dance ahead. Now, think about how isolated or connected this life was. Some assassins were lone wolves, ghosting through cities and countryside with only their shadow for company. Others belonged to secretive guilds or brotherhoods, where breakfast might mean shared meals, whispered strategies, and coded glances. This social dynamic influenced not just what they ate, but how they thought about their mission and their place in the dangerous tapestry of medieval politics. Speaking of political webs, it's fascinating to consider how assassins were sometimes employed by kings, nobles, or rival factions. Their breakfast might have been funded by those very people whose lives they could end before noon. Imagine the irony. Eating a humble meal paid for by a ruler who might be the target later that day. The line between servant and executioner blurred in the shadows. A quirky little detail worth chewing on. In some historical records, it's noted that certain assassins preferred breakfast foods believed to boost night vision or stealth. Ingredients like onions, garlic, or wild herbs were prized not only for taste but for supposed magical or physical benefits. Some sources even mention consuming raw meats or animal fats for strength, though this is debated heavily among scholars who caution against assuming all such practices were common or practical. You might chuckle picturing an assassin grimacing through a mouthful of raw rabbit liver, just because some old herbalist claimed it would grant them eyes like the owl. Whether true or legend, it shows how deeply intertwined belief and survival were in that time. As the morning stretches on, consider the broader context of medieval food culture. What an assassin ate for breakfast was shaped by geography, class, and access. A hired killer in a wealthy city might enjoy fine bread, imported spices, and fresh fruit, while one on the run in rural lands subsisted on whatever the forest or village offered. Nuts, berries, stale bread, and perhaps some leftover stew. Food scarcity, seasonality, and preservation methods all dictated the menu. And that leads to another curious thought. The assassin's breakfast, while practical and sometimes minimal, was also part of a larger sensory experience, textures, smells, and tastes that connected them to the world they navigated so deftly. The smell of fresh bread or roasting meat might remind them of home, or the sharp tang of vinegar might snap them back to the present. As you imagine this, you might also think about the aftertaste, both literal and metaphorical. The lingering flavor of morning food is one thing, but the moral and emotional weight of an assassin's life is another. These were people who walked a razor's edge, and breakfast was the last small comfort before stepping into shadows that could swallow them whole. Here's a subtle, almost poetic tidbit to close on. Some medieval texts suggest that assassins believed their morning meal could influence their fate that day. Eat too much and you'd be sluggish, too little and you'd be weak. The perfect breakfast was a kind of holy grail, balanced, sustaining, and symbolic of control over one's destiny. Whether this was superstition, psychology, or practical wisdom is still debated. So as you pull the blanket a little higher and close your eyes, let your mind drift with the scent of toasted grains and herbal teas, the soft clink of a spoon against a wooden bowl, and the quiet determination of someone who knows what the day demands. Remember that even in the darkest corners of history, breakfast was a moment of light, a fragile pause before the storm. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into the close of tonight's journey together. The day slips slowly into the quiet of evening, and you feel the weight of history settling softly around you like a warm blanket. The smoky scents of medieval kitchens fade into gentle whispers, and the harsh clatter of sharpened blades softens into the faintest hum of night. You find yourself drifting, not with a jolt or rush, but like a slow river winding through time. The images of crude breads, salted fish, and mysterious herbs begin to blur, melting into peaceful shadows that invite rest. The world of assassins and secret guilds, of whispered prayers and cautious glances, becomes a distant echo, a story told just before sleep takes hold. In this gentle darkness, your thoughts slow and stretch, like the final notes of a lullaby played softly on a distant harp. The dangers and mysteries of medieval mornings fade, replaced by the calm certainty of rest and renewal. Let your breathing deepen, the rhythm steady and smooth, as if matching the soft crackle of a fire fading to embers. Feel your mind unwind, piece by piece, as you prepare to slip from this story into dreams. Rest easy now, knowing that the small, simple acts, like a shared meal at dawn, have always been a thread of light through the longest nights. Let that thought carry you gently forward, where sleep awaits with open arms and peace. Sweet dreams.